Hi again. So you listen to the vocabulary. You will see those words in this reading. So what we're going to talk about is very interesting to me. It's the early history of the United States. So I started off Native Americans and the arrival of the Europeans. So we have two groups. The first people who lived in the United States and the people from Europe who came to the United States, and now we live together. Native Americans, the first people in the Americas, have lived in the Western Hemisphere for over 50,000 years. When Christopher Columbus reached North America in 1492, researchers estimate that 60 million Native Americans lived in the Western Hemisphere. Here is a map of the Western Hemisphere. This is the Western Hemisphere. So there were 60 million Native Americans here, researchers estimate, in 1492 when Christopher Columbus sailed here, and he went to the Caribbean first. That's a lot of people. The land Christopher Columbus and the subsequent explorers and settlers came to was known as the New World. The problem with this name was that this land wasn't a new world. People were living on the land already. Here's a map showing where the Native American tribes lived. So you can see we have 3 tribes in Washington. There's many more tribes. This is just some of the tribes. There were actually, I think, like 565 or 69 tribes, but these are just a few of the bigger tribes. So here we have the Chinook. Maybe you know the word Chinook salmon. Yakima tribe of Native Americans. You know the city of Yakima. And the Nez Perce Native Americans. So they all live around here. Let's see another one you might know. Oh, the Navajo is a very huge tribe that lived here. Okay. No one knows exactly how many Native Americans lived in the U.S. prior to the arrival of Christopher Columbus. Estimates vary widely because there were no records of the population. Some researchers estimate that there were 10 million or more Native Americans who were living in the United States in 1492. Compare 10 million Native Americans in the U.S. in 1492, which is, gosh, 530 years ago. Yeah. So 530 years ago, there were 10 million Native Americans in the United States, researchers estimate. And in 1492, there were approximately 80 million people who lived in Europe at the same time. So here is a very interesting map I found comparing the size of the US to the size of Europe. So we have Norway, Finland, Belarus, Ukraine, Romania, Turkey, Syria. So these countries are not considered Europe, they're considered the Near East. But this would be Greece, this would be Europe, Southern Europe, Italy, Spain, Portugal's part of Europe. So the United States is about the same size or a little bit smaller, it looks like, compared to Europe. So European explorers saw North America, the US, Canada, and Mexico as a rich new land, rich with animals, so they could use the fur and sell it in Europe to make a jacket. So a lot of explorers came to the New World, which they called it, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, to kill animals for their fur, then took the fur back to Europe. So they said it was rich with animals, gold, and new plants to discover. new plants like maybe apples or wheat or different plants. The Europeans, namely the English, French, and Spanish, were excited to exploit the natural resources, to take them back to Europe, or to build a new life for themselves in North America. So when you hear the word North America, you have to realize it's Canada, the United States, and Mexico. North America. The Western Hemisphere is North America, Central America, and South America. So the U.S. is part of North America, Canada, the United States, and Mexico. The first settlers. Now, the settlers were the first Europeans who came to the United States, or Canada, or Mexico to live. The first settlers to the United States came from England in the early 1600s. They came here to escape religious persecution in England, where everyone was required to worship God in a specific way, which the United States settlers didn't agree with. Examples of persecution included going to jail and getting killed. Even though they were all Christians, they were a different group of Christians and they fought against the Church of England. So then they decided to come here. This is very important, those early settlers only survived because of the Native Americans' help. We celebrate Thanksgiving Day because of the early settlers' ability to survive with help from the Native Americans. So here are the Native Americans. These are the early settlers. Without the Native Americans' help, these early settlers would have starved. No food, no food. They would have been very cold. So after 3 years living in the new United States, the early settlers survived and they had our first Thanksgiving. That's why we have Thanksgiving, to say thank you to God for surviving and thank you to the Native Americans for helping us. However, even though the Europeans would have died without Native American help, the Europeans almost always saw the Native Americans as savages or wild people, like animals. They saw them as needing Christianity or civilizing. You can see that in this picture. And I said I doubt the Native Americans wanted to worship the cross, though eventually some Native Americans became Christians. So this is an early picture showing some British people, looks like soldiers. Maybe this is supposed to be Christopher Columbus coming to the Americas, and the Native Americans worshiping the cross. But I don't think that's a true picture, but that's a picture that we see. This is the sad part. And I said, sadly. Sadly, as the English, French, and Spanish settlers and explorers came to North America in greater and greater number, they carried a hidden, deadly enemy to the Native Americans, new diseases such as smallpox, influenza, measles, and the chickenpox. Like COVID is a disease. So the Europeans brought these diseases to the Native Americans. And you guessed it, many Native Americans died because of these diseases. Because the Native Americans had no immunity to these diseases. Immunity means your body can fight the disease. They had no immunity to the diseases. Consequently, experts believe that as much as 90% of the American Indian population may have died from diseases, from illnesses brought by the Europeans. Illnesses and diseases, it means about the same thing. Can you imagine there used to be so many Native Americans, and then about 90%, that's what experts believe, that's what researchers believe, about 90% of all of the Native American people died because of the diseases. They didn't have immunity to the diseases. This means that only 1 in 10 natives survived this hidden enemy. Hidden means you can't see the disease. You don't see it, but someone coughs and then the virus goes and it goes in a different person. You don't see the virus. It's like the coronavirus. It's a hidden enemy. In addition, more bad treatment of the Native Americans. So this is our sad reading. The next 2 readings are happy, and the last one might be a little bit sad. More bad treatment of Native Americans. In addition to the European diseases that killed 90% of the Native Americans, some Native Americans were forced to be slaves. Ugh. Do you remember the word slaves? African Americans were slaves for 300 or 400 years. They had to work. They were hit by the white people. They were not given any money. Europeans needed workers to help build houses and clear fields for crops like wheat and corn and cotton. By the 1700s in North and South Carolina, 1/4 of all enslaved people were Native Americans. The other 3/4 were people who were captured from Africa. These pictures from the early 1900s, so 200 years later, show us that African Americans and Native Americans sometimes united, go together, to fight against oppression, and sometimes became friends and even intermarried. Intermarried means one group marries people from another group. People from different races get married. People from different countries get married. That could mean that people are intermarrying. So if you look at this picture closely, you can see that this is a Native American man. He had an African American wife and he had a Native American wife because, back then sometimes a man would have 2 or 3 wives, and then these were his children. And you can clearly see that he looks like an African American boy and he looks like a Native American boy. So this was an example of intermarriage. And then this shows that they are probably friends. I say they're friends because they're standing so closely together. So remember at the beginning, we discovered that researchers said there were 10 million people, Native Americans, like here, in 1492. Guess how many we have today? Now we count the population. Today, about 6.8 million Native Americans live in the United States and work in all walks of life. Doctors, teachers, computers, restaurant owners, all walks of life, farmers. However, many Americans continue to live on reservation land which the Europeans had initially forced them to live on in 1851. Here is a picture of the reservation land in Washington State. So you can see where I live up here. I live right by Canada. I am about 5 minutes away from the Lummi tribe and the Nooksack tribe. If you're down in Seattle, well, there's the Snoqualmie tribe. Oh, I can't read what that one says. Muckleshoot, you've heard of that. If you go to Makah, over here, this is the most northeastern part of the United States. This is a very interesting place. You go on that Indian reservation. So anywhere on the Olympic Peninsula, you're going to be on Indian reservation land. Puyallup, Nisqually, Snoqualmie, Sauk-Suatal, Yakima, Cowlitz, Chehalis, and so on. And this is a picture of different Native American people. I think he was in government. I don't know what all of them do. He looks like an astronaut. He looks like a musician. All in all, the U.S. has had a sad history. That said, the U.S. has also become a great country in many ways, which we will turn to in tomorrow's lesson. Thank you for watching. Bye.